Can a narcissist be a narcissist when they're just drunk? Like, does this work all the time or is it only during certain times? Sometimes you might see when you're with a toxic individual that certain characteristics are heightened depending on when you're around them or what's going on. Do you have a toxic person in your life that is addicted to some type of addiction? Maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's drugs, maybe it's something when they have this substance in their life, everything seems to get worse. And then when that substance isn't there, everything seems to get better. It doesn't necessarily mean that this person is or is not a narcissist. You'd have to look at the characteristics of how they're actually showing up on a day-to-day basis. But oftentimes, narcissists are known to have and to be prone to different addictions. Now, it doesn't always go hand in hand, but typically you have narcissistic personality disorder that is often has a proclivity to being addicted to things. Oftentimes, the biggest one is addicted to supply, like addicted to the other person, addicted to not what the other person of like, they're so great, but addicted to what do I get from this person? How do I get a response that I want? How do I get a reaction that I ultimately want? You see, the majority of time, narcissists are addicted to this piece of supply, reaction, response from another person that shows that the narcissist is still in control or still better than the other person. So what happens when you bring in alcohol into the system? Oftentimes, alcohol will lower the inhibitions of how the narcissist is showing up. So you might have a person that is a narcissist or is very toxic and is hiding that, is appearing a certain way because society would frown on him cheating and that being public, or society would frown on him abusing his wife. So instead, he hides it, right? But when you bring in different substances like alcohol, you're going to have this lowered inhibition of being able to actually fake it. And so the mask starts to slip. The words that come out start to become more hurtful because you're actually hearing the honest truth of what he's actually saying, of what's actually real underneath the surface. The majority of the time you don't see this, and the majority of the time you don't hear this because of the fact that he's keeping it together. He's keeping this mask, he's keeping this image, he's keeping this facade. Oftentimes when we have drugs, alcohol, different addictions, these things will start to lower the mask. Not consistently and not always, but a lot of times we see this pattern where the influence of other substances lowers the mask. So what do you need to do when you see this? Because when you see this, you're like, wait a second, he's a nice guy, he's a great guy, but when he's drunk, he's like awful. And he's very like narcissistic. And you're like, if he's the drunk version of him, he's full narcissist. If he's not, he's like half, or maybe he's not at all. But that's like the debate you're walking through. And the thing you need to understand is you can't get him to change the narcissistic ways, and you can't get him to change for you, and you can't get him to change for anyone else. The other thing you need to understand is until the addiction is dealt with, narcissism is off the table. Like until you can actually work through, hey, we need to get you to a place where you're thinking clearly, and then you see how you're showing up. Narcissism isn't even a topic you want to bring up to him or that you want to try to work on with him. Because if you can't get past this addiction piece that is changing his current reality, that's changing or dropping the mask, you can't actually do anything else with it. So that's kind of like the first line of defense is you have to be able to actually work through the addiction. If not, nothing's going to change. Majority of the times people don't want to do this because it exposes that they're struggling with it. It exposes like the shame and the guilt of dealing with an addiction. And oftentimes it doesn't actually put them in a place of saying, yeah, I want to work on this. I want to change. Because they're like, I'd rather sedate, I'd rather hide, I'd rather lie than deal with the actual addiction that's going on. So when you have this, when you have a narcissist in your life or a toxic person in your life, and you're like, he says really mean stuff whenever he's under the influence, oftentimes that's the real version coming out. That's the unfiltered, unsedated version coming out of him hiding himself and then being exposed because the alcohol, the drugs, whatever it might be, is lowering that thought process. You need to understand you have to look at what is being demonstrated. Like it's not enough just to listen to the words. You have to see what is being demonstrated, because if there's this oscillating back and forth, he loves me, he hates me, he cares about me, he doesn't care about me. You need to start getting to the truth. The truth can only be found if you actually deal with the facts. If you're unwilling to deal with the facts, then you will stay in this loop forever, and there won't be an option of you getting out. So understanding that if you don't get clear about the facts of how is he demonstrating love, how is he demonstrating care, how is he demonstrating respect in all aspects, whether he's drunk or whether he's sober, it doesn't matter. Need to be able to see, hey, this needs to actually matter to the other person. If not, they don't really care about you. They don't really care about themselves. Okay. Part of this whole piece with narcissism and with addictions, alcohol, drugs, things like that, you need to understand it is a mask lowering. Typically, you have the narcissist that will have a crack in their mask. You'll start to see behind closed doors of like, wait a second, this is how he snapped at me. Is this really what he thinks? Is this really what he's saying? Now, the next day, he'll explain it away. Oh, that was just me. That was just the influence. That was just the drug stalking. That wasn't actually me. Like, no, I love you. Of course I wouldn't say stuff like that. Like, are you serious? I didn't even say that at all. Like, he'll try to downplay it, try to minimize it, try to excuse it. So if you're running into this cycle, you need to take a step back and be like, wait a second. Is this actually prevalent in all aspects? I'm just not willing to see it. There's not typically this aspect once you see it. There's not typically this piece of like, he's amazing and then he's awful. Oftentimes it's like, wait a second, he's amazing to get certain things. He's acting a way to get certain things. But if I hold him accountable while he's amazing, then he turns awful. Then there's this back and forth of like, wait a second, this actually doesn't match up. So I want you to consider, how does this match up in your life today? Like, what are you seeing in the relationship? Is the mask dropping whenever he's under some form of addiction? What does it actually look like for you? If I can help him in any way, please reach out for help. Go to rawmotivations.com today.